Hannah Brooks thought she was meeting a rising photographer for a weekend of creative collaboration. Ryan Callahan had other plans. Behind his charming persona and curated online presence, Ryan was hiding a deadly obsession that would end in a locked motel room, a heavy suitcase, and a nationwide manhunt that exposed far more than just a single murder. It was just after noon on a humid August afternoon when the manager of the Maple View Inn, a small aging motel tucked alongside Highway 41 in Wisconsin, knocked on the door of room 9. The guest who had checked in 3 days earlier was due to leave that morning, but the room remained locked and quiet. After repeated knocks and unanswered phone calls, the manager retrieved the master key. What he found inside was not what he expected. The bed was unmade, the lights still on, and the air was thick with an overwhelming stench that instantly made him step back. He assumed something had spoiled or that perhaps a guest had left food rotting. He called for the janitor. The janitor, a man in his 60s, with decades of unpleasant motel cleanups behind him, entered the room reluctantly. He searched for the source of the smell. The bathroom was empty. The trash had already been cleared. That's when he crouched to look under the bed. There, wedged tightly into the narrow space beneath the frame, was a large navy blue suitcase. It looked too heavy and too clean to be forgotten luggage. When he tried to move it, he realized it was unnaturally dense. Suspicious and uneasy, he called the police. When officers arrived, they immediately cordoned off the room. It didn't take long for them to unzip the suitcase and reveal the horror inside. Wrapped in layers of clear plastic and duct tape was the dismembered body of a woman. Her limbs had been separated and folded to fit inside. There was no blood in the suitcase. Everything had been methodically cleaned, but the smell was unmistakable, the result of decomposition beginning to take hold in the hot motel room. News of the gruesome discovery spread quickly. Reporters began gathering outside the Maple View Inn by that evening, and locals watched from a distance, stunned that such a brutal crime had occurred in their sleepy town. Investigators worked into the night to document the scene and collect forensic evidence. Initial clues were scarce. The suitcase had no visible tags. There were no fingerprints on the plastic or duct tape. Whoever had done this had taken their time and cleaned up carefully. The next step was to identify the victim. The body showed signs of bruising and restraint marks, but decomposition made recognition difficult. The woman had no ID, no jewelry, no phone. Dental records and DNA would be needed, and the process would take days. In the meantime, investigators combed through motel records, security footage, and local missing persons reports. Less than 48 hours later, a match was made. A missing person report filed in Chicago the week before described a 26-year-old art student named Hannah Brooks. She had vanished after texting a friend to say she was heading to Milwaukee for a weekend trip. Her family hadn't heard from her since. A DNA match confirmed what her mother already feared. The woman in the suitcase was Hannah. What began as a routine cleaning task had uncovered a chilling mystery. A young woman had ended up in a suitcase, her killer nowhere to be found, and the quiet town of Mapleview was now the epicenter of a disturbing investigation. Hannah Brooks had always been dependable. She was the kind of person who texted back quickly, who double-checked her travel plans, and who never went off the grid without telling someone. So when her roommate realized she hadn't returned by Monday morning and hadn't replied to any texts, concern quickly turned into panic. Hannah had left Chicago on a Friday, telling friends she was headed to Milwaukee for a weekend getaway. She mentioned she might meet up with someone she'd recently connected with, but offered few details. Police began by tracing Hannah's last known movements. Her bank account activity showed she purchased a train ticket to Milwaukee at 9:12 a.m. on the day she left. Surveillance footage at the Chicago train station confirmed it was her boarding the 10:05 a.m. train, wearing a light jacket and carrying a small backpack. She looked relaxed, even smiling at something on her phone. That was the last time anyone saw her alive in public. At the Milwaukee station, more security footage captured Hannah stepping off the train. Waiting for her near the pickup zone was a black sedan. She walked toward it without hesitation and got inside. Investigators couldn't see the driver's face, but they now had a vehicle. The footage was blurry and the license plate unreadable, but it was a starting point. By slowing down the footage and cross-referencing similar vehicles in the area, authorities narrowed it down to a late-model Nissan Altima. Hannah's phone pinged a tower just outside the city about an hour after she arrived. Then it went silent. No texts, no calls, no social media updates. It was as though she had simply disappeared. Investigators searched her apartment in Chicago for clues. Her laptop was open, and in her browser history they found several recent searches related to photography and art modeling. Among them was the name Ryan Callahan. He was a freelance photographer with a sizable Instagram following, known for his haunting, high-contrast portraits of women. His feed was filled with models, all young and striking, often posed in empty industrial buildings or dimly lit rooms. A few of the women tagged in his photos later told investigators that he had a reputation for being controlling and, at times, overly intense during shoots. Further digging revealed that Ryan and Hannah had first met at a gallery opening 3 weeks before her disappearance. They had exchanged social media handles, and soon after, she followed him on Instagram. A series of private messages showed him inviting her to Milwaukee for a weekend shoot, promising her portfolio-quality images and a chance to collaborate on a new project. Investigators now had a name and a person of interest. When they visited Ryan's listed address in Milwaukee, the landlord told them he hadn't seen him in days. The apartment appeared lived in, but hastily abandoned. Dishes were in the sink, a bed was unmade, and a few camera cases remained stacked in the corner. But there was no sign of Ryan, and no sign of Hannah. The search for answers was intensifying. Whoever had picked up Hannah in that black car knew exactly what they were doing. They had left no obvious traces, no witnesses, and no immediate motive. But behind the camera and the Instagram persona, police were starting to suspect that Ryan Callahan was hiding something much darker. The apartment Ryan Callahan rented on the outskirts of Milwaukee was in a quiet, nondescript building, tucked between a strip mall and an empty parking lot. To neighbors, he seemed polite but distant, always coming and going at odd hours with camera bags slung over his shoulder. When police entered the unit with a warrant, they expected to find clues. What they discovered instead painted a disturbing picture of a man who had been living a double life. The main living area appeared ordinary at first glance: unwashed dishes, stacks of photography magazines, and a couch covered in unfolded laundry. But as investigators moved deeper into the apartment, they found a locked door at the end of a short hallway. Behind it was a makeshift photography studio. The windows had been blacked out, soundproof foam lined the walls, and a series of bright, high-end lights surrounded a small backdrop of white fabric. A tripod still stood in the center of the room, pointed at an empty stool. Lying nearby was a collection of Polaroid photos. Many featured young women in various poses, some clothed, others not. Each had something in common. The women's faces had been scratched out with something sharp, their eyes completely destroyed. Investigators carefully collected the images. A few of the women were identified as previous collaborators who had worked with Ryan and later described feeling uncomfortable or uneasy during their sessions. In a closet, detectives found rolls of plastic sheeting, duct tape, and heavy-duty trash bags. It was a haunting match to the materials used in the suitcase found at the motel. Receipts dated just days before Hannah's disappearance showed Ryan had purchased these exact items from a local hardware store. The same receipts also showed the purchase of a navy blue suitcase, identical to the one discovered beneath the motel bed. In Ryan's bedroom, a laptop sat on the nightstand. On it were folders labeled with names, some recognizable from social media, others unknown. Inside the folders were dozens of photos, some professionally edited and others taken with a phone. One folder, labeled HB, contained images of Hannah Brooks. In one, she was seated on the same stool in the studio, staring off camera with an unreadable expression. In another, she looked visibly uncomfortable. None of the photos had been posted publicly. Even more chilling was a spiral-bound notebook found beneath the bed. In it, Ryan had written entries detailing his thoughts about control, obedience, and transformation. Though not outright confessions, the notes revealed an obsession with capturing not just a person's image but their vulnerability. The final entry was dated the day after Hannah disappeared. It read simply, "She knows too much." Despite the overwhelming evidence, Ryan was gone. No neighbors had seen him in days, and his phone had been shut off. Police issued a nationwide alert, listing him as a fugitive and warning the public not to approach. He was considered dangerous and possibly armed. What had begun as a missing person case had now exploded into a manhunt. The clean-cut, soft-spoken photographer had vanished, leaving behind a studio of secrets and a suitcase filled with horror. Authorities feared he was already planning his next move, or worse, his next victim. Ryan Callahan had vanished without a trace. In the days following the search of his apartment, law enforcement agencies across multiple states were placed on high alert. His photo appeared on news broadcasts, online crime forums, and digital billboards. Tips began to pour in from the public, many claiming to have seen someone who looked like him in cities across the Midwest. But none of the sightings could be verified. Ryan had disappeared with alarming precision, and investigators knew time was critical. Through traffic camera data and toll booth records, authorities were able to confirm that Ryan had driven north, out of Milwaukee just hours before the police obtained a search warrant. His black sedan was found abandoned in a Walmart parking lot in Minnesota, wiped clean of fingerprints. A review of nearby surveillance cameras showed him walking away from the lot with a duffel bag over his shoulder, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses. He had changed his appearance slightly. His hair was cut shorter, and he had shaved his beard. From there, his trail went cold. Authorities speculated that Ryan, with his background in photography and online culture, was skilled at slipping off the grid. He knew how to avoid digital footprints. He hadn't used any credit cards or known online accounts since Hannah's disappearance. Investigators believed he might be traveling under a new identity and possibly using cash or prepaid debit cards to stay hidden. Weeks passed with little progress. Then, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. In a small town in Idaho, nearly 500 miles from Milwaukee, a gas station clerk recognized a face on the wanted poster pinned to their bulletin board. The man had been in the store the previous night, buying snacks and filling up a large white van with Arizona plates. He paid in cash and barely spoke. What caught the clerk's attention was the man's eyes. They matched the photo, even if the hair was dyed and the facial hair was gone. The tip was quickly verified. Authorities located the van parked behind an abandoned farmhouse just outside town. When officers arrived, they found Ryan asleep in the back of the vehicle, surrounded by camera equipment, fake IDs, and a burner phone. He was arrested without resistance, calm and cooperative, as though he had been waiting for it to happen. Inside the van were journals, sketches, and flash drives. The journals contained cryptic writings and disturbing reflections about his art and the women he had photographed. One page described Hannah in chilling detail, how she had challenged him, how she had seen through his carefully constructed persona. The flash drives held more photos, some of them clearly taken without the subject's knowledge. Though no additional bodies were discovered, it became clear to investigators that Hannah was likely not his first attempt, only the first to uncover the truth. News of Ryan's capture sent a wave of relief through the communities affected, but there was no celebration. The reality of what he had done and what he may have planned to do again was far too heavy. The manhunt had ended, but the full depth of his crimes was still coming to light. The courtroom was silent as the trial of Ryan Callahan began. Family members, journalists, and curious onlookers filled the seats, all drawn to the chilling story of a man whose seemingly creative life masked a much darker obsession. Ryan, dressed in a plain suit, sat expressionless as prosecutors presented the evidence that had led to his arrest. He refused to speak during proceedings, declining to testify or offer any explanation for his actions. But the evidence told its own haunting story. Prosecutors laid out a detailed timeline of Hannah Brooks's final days, from her online communication with Ryan to her arrival in Milwaukee and her entry into the black sedan. Forensic experts testified about the materials used in the disposal of her body, the plastic wrap, the duct tape, the suitcase. Each item traced back to Ryan through store receipts and surveillance footage. The photos found in his apartment were shown to the jury. Images of Hannah taken in the same studio where her final moments likely occurred. None showed violence, but the progression of her discomfort was clear. The most disturbing part of the trial came when the contents of the storage unit were revealed. After Ryan's arrest, authorities had tracked down several rental units registered under fake identities. In one, they found a collection of large suitcases. Inside were women's clothing, personal items, handwritten letters, and photos, many of which featured women who had never been reported missing. Some of the photos matched the style of Ryan's online portfolio, but others were unedited, candid, and clearly not meant for public view. Though no additional bodies were recovered, investigators believed the unit held trophies. Evidence suggested that Ryan had been following, photographing, and possibly harming women for years. Several of the personal items were traced back to women who had gone missing in other states, though without conclusive proof, no further charges were filed. Still, the jury saw enough to understand the pattern. Hannah Brooks was not a random victim. She was someone who uncovered the truth and paid the price for it. The defense attempted to argue mental illness, claiming that Ryan had suffered from delusions that blurred his perception of reality. But the journals, the methodical planning, and the calculated steps he took to cover his tracks painted a different picture, one of control, obsession, and cold intent. After a 2-week trial, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. Ryan Callahan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called his actions a calculated betrayal of trust, cloaked in the illusion of art. For Hannah's family, the sentence brought some measure of closure, but the damage lingered. Her mother spoke briefly outside the courthouse, reminding the world that Hannah was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, and an artist, with a future stolen too soon. The story of the suitcase in the motel room had begun as a horrifying mystery. But as each piece fell into place, it exposed a predator who hid behind a camera lens, manipulating his way into people's lives. And, while justice had been served, the full scope of his crimes may never be fully known.